The courtroom was packed. Cameras flashed. Reporters whispered. And all eyes were locked on Karoline Leavitt as she stood before the bench. The judge, a towering figure of authority, leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "Ms. Leavitt," he said, voice dripping with skepticism. "Do you seriously expect this court to entertain such nonsense?" Gasps rippled through the room. Karoline's expression didn't waver, but those who knew her could see the flicker of tension in her clenched jaw. And then it happened. The judge didn't just dismiss her arguments. He obliterated them, sentence by sentence. He dismantled every claim, leaving Karoline standing in stunned silence. But just when it seemed like the humiliation was complete, she did something that no one expected. With a slow, deliberate smile, she clapped. Once, twice, then. The entire courtroom watched in shock as she delivered a single, devastating sentence that changed everything. What did she say? What happened next? The answer will leave you reeling. Want the full, jaw-dropping details? Keep reading, because this is one showdown you won't forget. Fire, the courtroom erupts. Karoline Leavitt's next move shocks everyone. The sound of Karoline's slow, deliberate claps echoed through the tense courtroom. The judge's face darkened. The prosecutors exchanged bewildered glances. The audience sat in stunned silence, waiting, no, dreading, what she would say next. And then, with ice in her voice, Karoline leaned forward and uttered the words that no one saw coming. "Your Honor, you just made the biggest mistake of your career." The air crackled with tension. The judge's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me," he asked, voice laced with irritation. But Karoline wasn't finished. She reached into her bag and pulled out a single sealed envelope. The room collectively inhaled. The bailiff took a cautious step forward. But Karoline simply smirked and waved the envelope in the air. "You think I came here unprepared? You think I didn't anticipate this exact moment," she said, her voice dripping with confidence. She tossed the envelope onto the judge's desk. It landed with a soft thud, but the weight of its contents sent shockwaves through the room. The judge hesitated. His fingers hovered over the envelope, the uncertainty flickering in his eyes for just a second, and then he tore it open. Silence, as the judge read the papers inside. His face drained of color, his lips parted, but no words came out. The attorneys sitting across from Karoline leaned forward, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever was written inside. Whatever it was bad. The judge's hand trembled slightly as he set the papers down. He looked up at Karoline. His voice, which had been so powerful just minutes ago, now came out barely above a whisper. "Where did you get this?" A sly smile crept across Karoline's face. She crossed her arms, exuding complete dominance. "Oh, Your Honor, you should really be more careful about who you cross." A murmur spread through the courtroom. The prosecutor turned pale. The reporters scrambled to write down every single word. And then the judge slammed his gavel down. "We need to clear this courtroom. Now." But it was too late. The secret was already out. And what happened next? It changed everything. Secrets unraveled. The courtroom descends into chaos. The judge's voice boomed through the room. But the energy had already shifted. People were on their feet. Reporters, once frozen in stunned silence, were now furiously scribbling notes and whispering into their recorders. The prosecution team was whispering to each other, their panic barely concealed. And Karoline? She simply sat back in her chair, her arms crossed, an amused smirk on her lips. "Clear the courtroom?" she echoed, her voice carrying over the din. "Oh no, Your Honor, you don't get to silence this." The judge stood up abruptly, his face a mask of barely contained rage. "Bailiff," he snapped, "escort everyone out now." But before the bailiff could move, a deep voice cut through the commotion. "I think we all deserve to hear what's inside that envelope." Every head in the room whipped around. A man stood near the back of the courtroom, his hands in his pockets. Tall, confident, dangerous. His presence alone sent a ripple through the crowd. Karoline's smirk widened. "Ah," she said smoothly. "I was wondering when you'd show up." The judge's expression darkened. "You have no authority here," he barked at the man. "Who do you think you are?" The man took a slow, deliberate step forward. The kind of step that commanded attention. The kind of step that said, "You should be afraid." And then he dropped his badge onto the desk. FBI. The courtroom exploded. Gasps. Shocked murmurs. Some people instinctively took a step back. The judge's hands clenched the edges of his desk, his knuckles turning white. Karoline simply tilted her head, watching with the keen interest of someone who already knew the next move on the chessboard. "I don't believe we've met," she said, voice cool. The agent's gaze was locked onto the judge. "Oh, we've met," he murmured. The judge paled. And then the agent turned his attention to the crumpled envelope still lying on the desk. He reached forward, picked up the damning papers, and read them aloud, with every word. The judge sank further into his chair, his face twisted, his mouth opening and closing like a man grasping for an escape. But there was none, because the words the agent was reading, they exposed everything. Bribery, witness tampering, a massive cover-up, the judge's corruption laid bare, in front of a courtroom full of people. And Karoline, she leaned in, her eyes flashing with victory. Checkmate. The judge's hands trembled. The bailiff looked frozen, unsure whether to arrest Karoline or the judge. And then the doors burst open. A team of FBI agents swarmed the room. "Judge Walter Reeves, you are under arrest." The once mighty judge collapsed into his chair, speechless. The crowd was on its feet, cameras flashing, people shouting. Karoline slowly rose, brushing imaginary dust off her sleeve. Her eyes locked on the judge as they slapped handcuffs onto his wrists. "I told you," she murmured, just loud enough for him to hear. "Biggest mistake of your career." The judge looked up at her, and in his eyes, there was pure, unfiltered fear. And Karoline? She simply turned on her heel and walked out without looking back. But this was far from over, because what Karoline Leavitt had planned next would shake the entire system to its core. The fallout begins, a system on the brink of collapse. The moment Karoline stepped out of the courthouse, the air was electric. The press, the bystanders, the agents, everyone seemed to understand that something monumental had just happened. And yet, this was only the beginning. She barely had time to breathe before a wave of reporters surged forward, microphones and cameras thrust in her face. "Ms. Leavitt, what's your response to the judge's arrest? Did you plan this from the beginning? Are you working with the FBI?" Karoline held up a single hand. The crowd fell silent. She let the pause stretch, controlling the room without saying a word. Then, with a slow, deliberate smirk, she leaned into the nearest microphone. "Justice," she said smoothly, "has a funny way of catching up to the guilty, doesn't it?" The crowd erupted. Flashes burst. Reporters shouted more questions. But Karoline didn't answer. Instead, she turned, walking straight toward the black car waiting at the curb. As soon as the door closed behind her, the energy inside the vehicle shifted. A figure sat across from her in the shadows, waiting, watching. "You cut it close," the man murmured. Karoline leaned back, crossing her legs. "Please," she said. "I had it handled." The man exhaled a quiet chuckle. "Oh, I don't doubt that. But let's not pretend this is over." Karoline's smirk faltered, because he was right. The judge was just one piece of the puzzle. The corruption ran so much deeper. And if they thought those in power would take this lying down, they were dead wrong. The man slid a folder across the seat. Karoline didn't have to open it to know what it contained. Names, Connections. Threats. They'll come for you next. The man said, voice low. Karoline finally met his gaze. Then let them, because this war had just begun. The hunt begins, a target on her back. Karoline gripped the folder, her fingers tightening around the edges as she stared at the name printed on the first page. This was bigger than she had imagined. The car hummed through the streets of D.C., but the tension inside it was thick, suffocating. Are you sure you want to do this? The man asked, watching her carefully. Once you open that file, there's no going back. Karoline exhaled slowly. She already knew the answer. She flipped the folder open, and the moment her eyes landed on the names inside, her blood turned to ice. There, at the top of the list, was someone she never expected, someone she trusted. No, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the soft hum of the engine. The man across from her didn't blink. Now you understand, he murmured. Betrayal. The word slammed into her like a physical blow. She had risked everything, her reputation, her career, her life, to expose corruption. But now she was the one being hunted. The driver's voice crackled through the intercom. Ma'am, we have a tail. Karoline's pulse spiked. She glanced out the window. There, in the reflection of the rain-slicked glass, she saw them, two black SUVs weaving through traffic behind them. They're moving fast. The driver said, too fast. The man across from her didn't move. They're not here to follow. Karoline knew what he meant. They were here to eliminate, and they weren't going to wait for an opportunity. They were making one. Suddenly, a deafening crash. The car lurched violently, the impact sending Karoline flying into the side door. Glass shattered. Tires screamed. Hold on, the driver shouted. The world spun as the car fishtailed, the SUVs closing in like sharks smelling blood. Karoline forced herself upright, her mind racing. They weren't going to let her leave this city alive, unless she made sure they didn't. The man beside her slid a pistol into her palm. Your move. Leavitt. Karoline cocked the gun. She didn't hesitate. She never did. And with one deep breath, she kicked the door open and leapt into chaos. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Karoline hit the pavement hard, rolling as the heat from the burning wreckage scorched the air around her. The SUVs had boxed them in. There was no escape. But Karoline wasn't the type to wait for an execution. Not today. Gunfire erupted. Bullets shredded the metal of the car she had just abandoned, sparks flying like angry fireflies in the night. Get down, the man shouted, ducking behind the wreckage. But Karoline was already moving. She sprinted toward the nearest alleyway, her heart pounding like a war drum. The SUV's doors flew open, for armed men jumped out. They were trained. They were fast. But Karoline was faster. She dove behind a dumpster as a bullet whizzed past her ear, embedding itself in the brick wall beside her. We need to move, the man called from behind cover. No, Karoline hissed. We need to end this. She peeked around the corner. Her pursuers were closing in. One of them, a tall figure with a scar running down his jaw, signaled to the others. They weren't just here to kill her. They wanted something, and she had a pretty good guess what it was. The file, the truth, the evidence that could bring everything crashing down. Karoline's grip on the pistol tightened. She had one chance, one shot. She took a deep breath, steadied her aim, and bam! The man with the scar dropped like a stone. The others hesitated. Just for a split second, that was all she needed. Karoline launched herself forward, weaving between gunfire, her adrenaline surging. Another shot, another hit, then a hand closed around her wrist. She gasped, whirling around. It was him, the last person she ever expected to see, the last person she ever wanted to trust. We have to go, he said, his voice calm despite the chaos. Karoline froze. Was this a rescue? Or was it a trap? Before she could decide, the man yanked her forward, and the world exploded into darkness. A descent into darkness. Caroline's vision blurred as the explosion ripped through the alleyway. The four sent her sprawling, ears ringing, dust choking her lungs. She tried to push herself up, but a heavy boot slammed down on her wrist. Going somewhere. Her breath caught in her throat. The voice was ice cold, calculated, too familiar. Through the smoke, he stepped forward. Nathaniel Graves, a name that sent shivers down the spines of even the most hardened criminals. His dark trench coat billowed in the wind, his gloved fingers flexing as he towered over her. Did you really think you could outrun me? Caroline gritted her teeth, her mind racing. Nathaniel was a ghost, a myth, a shadow. But now, he was standing over her, real, alive, and very, very dangerous. He knelt, gripping her chin between his fingers, forcing her to look at him. You stole something from me, Caroline, and I don't like thieves. Her heart pounded. The file, that's what he wanted. That meant he didn't have it yet. Good. She still had a chance. With lightning speed, she lashed out, her knee connecting with his ribs. Nathaniel stumbled, just for a second, but a second was all she needed. Caroline snatched the gun from his holster, rolled her feet, and aimed it right between his eyes. You're not as fast as you think, Graves. He chuckled, and you're not as ruthless as you pretend to be. Then a sharp click, before she could react. Cold metal pressed against the back of her head. Her stomach dropped. She hadn't heard them coming. She hadn't seen them surround her. For men, all armed, their weapons trained on her like wolves, circling a wounded deer. Nathaniel stood, dusting himself off, his smirk growing. Now, he said, stepping closer. Let's have a little chat about that file, before I decide whether you get to leave this alley alive. Caroline swallowed hard. This wasn't just a trap. It was a death sentence. But if they thought she was going down without a fight, they were dead wrong. And oh, way out the cold steel of the gun pressed against Caroline's skull sent a jolt of adrenaline through her veins. Her mind raced. For men, armed, Graves, unshaken, but she still had the gun. Slowly, she raised her hands, feigning surrender, playing for time. Smart girl. Nathaniel murmured, stepping closer. Too close. Good. Caroline moved like lightning. She whipped around, grabbing the man behind her by the wrist, twisting the gun from his grip. A shot rang out. The alley erupted into chaos. She ducked low, using the man as a shield as Graves' men opened fire. Bullets ricocheted off, brick walls, sparks flying in the darkness. She felt the man jerk, a bullet tearing through him. One down. She spun, firing twice. Another man dropped, clutching his throat, choking on his own breath. Graves was already moving. Caroline felt the impact before she saw it. A force slammed into her side, sending her crashing against the wall. The gun skittered across the ground. She gasped. His hands were on her throat. Nathaniel's grip tightened, pinning her against the cold bricks. This is getting old. Caroline, he growled, eyes dark, unreadable, spots danced in her vision. She clawed at his arm, but he was stronger. She needed a weapon, fast. Her fingers brushed against something cold. Metal. She grabbed it, the knife in his belt, with the last of her strength. She drove it into his side. Nathaniel staggered back, cursing. Caroline gasped for air, vision swimming. She had seconds. She dived for the gun. Graves was already reaching for her. Her fingers wrapped around the handle, and then a blinding light flooded the alley. A booming voice echoed through the night. Freeze. Hands where we can see them. Caroline's blood ran cold. Not police. Something worse. Nathaniel cursed under his breath. They both turned, and what she saw made her heart stop. A row of black SUVs blocked the alley entrance. Men in tactical gear poured out, weapons raised, faces concealed. But the emblem on their vests, she recognized it instantly. The syndicate, the people she had stolen the file from. And now they wanted it back. Nathaniel gave her a dark smile, blood dripping from his wound. Well, he murmured, looks like we're both screwed now. And no way out. Part 2. Karoline's breath hitched. The syndicate. The organization she had spent years running from. They had found her. The alley was boxed in. No escape. Nathaniel staggered but grinned, wiping blood from his mouth. Looks like we're partners now. Sweetheart. Karoline didn't answer. Her mind was racing. The syndicate's men advanced. Weapons raised. Karoline Leavitt. A voice boomed through a speaker. Cold, precise, deadly. She knew that voice. Vincent Crow, the syndicate's fixer. The last person anyone wanted on their trail. A black-gloved hand reached into the SUV, and Crow stepped out. Tall, impeccable suit, the devil in human form. His piercing eyes locked onto Karoline. I believe you have something that belongs to us. The file. The one she had risked everything to steal. The one that could bring the entire syndicate down. But there was one problem. She didn't have it anymore. Nathaniel shifted beside her, still smirking. Damn him. He loved this. Tell me where the file is. Crow continued, stepping forward, unshaken. And maybe, just maybe, I'll let you walk away. Karoline let out a breathless laugh. They both knew that was a lie. Nathaniel chuckled. Crow, mate, you and I both know she's not going to hand it over that easy. Crow didn't even glance at him. Nathaniel wasn't the priority. Karoline was. A bead of sweat rolled down her spine. They were running out of time. Last chance. Leavitt, Crow said softly. Where is it? Silence. Then Karoline moved. She grabbed Nathaniel by the collar and yanked him forward. Twisting, a gunshot exploded. Nathaniel gasped. Stumbling, blood bloomed on his shoulder. But Karoline was already spinning, grabbing his fallen gun. A single moment of hesitation. That was all she needed. She fired. Boom. The SUV's windshield shattered. The syndicate's men scattered, shouting orders. Karoline ran. Nathaniel was right behind her. Bullets ripped through the night. They crashed through the back door of an abandoned shop. Breathing hard, Nathaniel slumped against the counter, clutching his wound. You used me as a shield. Darling, he groaned. That's just cruel. Karoline ignored him, peeking out the window. The syndicate was already closing in. They had minutes. Nathaniel exhaled sharply. So, gonna tell me where the damn file is? Karoline finally turned to him and smiled. I already sent it. Nathaniel's eyes widened. To who? He demanded. Karoline's pulse pounded. The only person left she could trust. She grabbed a burner phone, dialed a number. The line clicked. A voice answered. Leavitt. Karoline swallowed. It's done. You have the file. Silence. Then, the voice replied, we need to meet. Now. Karoline exhaled, turning to Nathaniel. Looks like we're not done yet.